Well, welcome. It is a cold and raining, wet winter's day in Dunedin, so there is definitely no filming outside. But we get to unpack and explore this next module together, which is systems and systems thinking. Systems thinking is a really crucial and fundamental component or theory in sustainability, and we're going to do our best to start to unpack that. So far, we've been looking at meeting people's needs, and that has been looking at what are basic human needs that we all need in order to thrive and flourish. Now we're going to take a zoom out on that and start to ask the question, and what is the society or what is the environment that is holding those people that need those needs that are very diverse, and how does that society or that environment help us to do that? So to start off with systems thinking, let's look at what a system is. So a system is a whole pile of components that are interrelated and interconnected, and together they form a whole. Now they're often very complex, and we'll give a few examples of this. So let's first of all let's look at a forest. So a forest is made up of many different components. We can look at trees, the rain that comes down, the sun that comes down, the soil, the roots, all the little insects, the birds. These are all different components. And together they form something greater than their individualness, and they come together to form a whole. So the whole is the beautiful forest, and it ends up turning into a sum bigger than the individual parts. So that is synergy, when these individual pieces come together and they form something bigger than themselves, bigger than the sum of their parts. We can also take another example, which is the human body. Now, the human body is made up of many different systems. There are actually 11 in total. And you can think about all the different components of your body, the different cells, the different organs, and there are certain functions or systems that are happening that can keep us alive. Again, it's very, very complex, and all those individual components need to work together. They need to be interrelated, so they are completely connected and rely on one another, and interrelated in terms of they have a relationship between each other. So I'm going to give you one system. So let's say the digestive system. That's one of the 11. And I'm wondering how many you can come up with right now. How many different systems are operating in your body? Can you come up with the other 10? All right, that's all the time I'm going to give you. But I'm going to talk you through the remaining 10, but I am going to need my notes. So digestive, respiratory, there's the skeletal, the muscular, the nervous, endocrine, cardiovascular, lymphatic, respiratory, digestive, urinary, reproductive, and integumentary. Now I had to look that one up. I wasn't familiar with that one. But that one is all to do with the organ of your skin, which is actually quite an appropriate metaphor for where we're at, because week one was all about the self and looking internally. And then this week is looking at how we start to interface or work with others and people around us. And that is exactly what the organ of the skin does. It is the interface between our internal environment and our external environment. So there are a whole pile of different systems. let's look at the respiratory system, for example. So air coming in to the lungs, sending that oxygen down to through our blood and into our muscles. This is happening completely subconsciously. But without all these different components working together, interrelated, interconnected, then we wouldn't have a whole, right? We wouldn't have the whole of the human body. A couple of other things that start to define systems thinking. Some ideas from Stanford. I'm just going to read them out. So it's looking at the big picture. So no longer are we just looking at our own little world. And I'm going to relate this to an ostrich. So sometimes if we imagine an ostrich, right, like having blinkers on or not wanting to see something, the story goes that the ostrich puts its head in the sand, right? Pretends like it's not there. Whatever the problem is, not going to happen. Let's imagine there's a lion there waiting to eat it. Okay, I'm just going to put my head in the sand. And what, of course, happens to the ostrich? It gets eaten, right? How do we relate this to society? Well, it could be said that up until now, and hopefully it starts to change, our society has been going along kind of with blinkers on, or a little bit with their head in the sand, going, you know what, like all that climate change, not a big deal. I'm just going to keep worrying about me. I'm going to pretend like none of that is really a problem, really exists, and I'll just put my head in the sand and just see what happens. Well, in the story, the ostrich gets eaten. And what scientists are saying is that if we don't do something now, if we don't actually take our head out of the sand, then so too will our human society get eaten, or, you know, huge detrimental impacts on the planet. So systems thinking starts to look really at the big picture. No longer is it just about us and our only what we can see. It's what happens outside of that. And I'll give another example. When you go to the supermarket and you want to buy a food product, let's say it's a muesli bar. You pick the muesli bar off the shelf, go home, rip the packaging open, eat your muesli bar, put the wrapper in the rubbish bin. Now, if you were just focusing on your little part of this, all you see is going to the supermarket, eating it, putting the rubbish in the bin. But we know there is a whole story that is much larger or much bigger than that. So where did all those individual products come from to then make your muesli bar? How was it grown? Whose hands grew it? How was it transported? What factory did it go to? How did all those different components, you can even say a muesli bar was a system, many different components coming together to form a whole, right? A muesli bar. Then we have the packaging of it. Where did the resources come from to make the packaging? Who designed the packaging? Who put it inside the little box? Who designed the box? Who was the delivery person? Who's even operating the supermarket? Who decided to market it? Whose brand is it? So much going into before we even get the muesli bar off the shelf. Then the rubbish, right? So you could say that the muesli bar goes into your human body. That then enters a whole pile of other systems, digestive system, probably being the most obvious one, and you know, helps to inform us. Then the waste, just because your waste goes into a rubbish bin doesn't mean that's the end of it, right? That is not the end of the story. So that needs to go either into landfill or hopefully get recycled or repackaged or reused in some sort of capacity. And systems thinking is moving from a linear approach, so an A to B. In that model, it would be like a designing a product, selling the product, it goes to the consumer, done in a line, and moving to a circular system, which is then looking at the wider picture of everything that I just explained, and how could the actual product or the waste of the product come back into the system and keep getting reused. And that really is started at the design phase. So way back in the very beginning, designing how the waste of the product will come back into the system. So glass or tin, for example, can get melted down. Plastic can't. It's going to end up in landfill. So we get to make choices about whether we're operating in a linear system or a circular system. Systems thinking is also about taking that wider perspective, which I just talked about, considering multiple perspectives. So not just our own, but if we're designing a park, for example, thinking about how many different people are using that park. Are there more able-bodied people, less able-bodied people? Are there children, people, older people? Do some people want to just lie down in the grass and relax, or do other people want to play in the jungle gym? So looking at multiple perspectives on how to design things, examining how things relate, and looking for root causes and improvements. So if there is an issue or a problem, not just treating the symptom of the problem, but going to the root cause. And if you are working anywhere in healthcare, for example, this could be a really good example of how to take a wider picture and a systems thinking approach to healthcare, for example. If you think about going to your doctor, this is just anyone, not just only if you're studying healthcare, but is your doctor only treating the symptom of your problem, or are they starting to look at the root cause of where your illness or your sickness or your disease has come from? So in that way, we can also be treating ourselves as systems, our life, looking at it from a systems thinking approach. And if I can just invite you to think back into some of those models of what is sustainability, there were a couple of different models, and there was one model that started to represent perhaps the interrelated interconnectedness of all these different components and more of a systems thinking approach. I'm wondering if you can think back to what that model might possibly be. Can you remember that one? Hmm. And so then the real question comes down to, so why is understanding the wider system of what we operate within and what we will be looking at for our creative project, our Kaihokai project, understanding the system that sits within, like, why is this all important? Well, a couple of reasons. The first is, if we as individuals continue to have our head in the sand, then we will eventually get eaten. And it actually requires all of us, because we are a human system. Society is many, many different components, humans interrelating, being interconnected to form a whole, to form a society, to form culture, for example. So really, for our survival, we need to get on the same page with this. We need to really start working together. The other reason why it's so important is because if we don't understand the system properly, then we can actually have detrimental impact, even when we're trying to do something that's trying to help. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of this. The first is a personal one. So probably about 8 years ago, I was traveling in Southern Africa, and it's a longer story, but essentially what happened is I ended up living in a high density suburb in Bulawayo in